It's March 9th, currently 3:30 p.m. East Coast time, 12 noon time. I'm with John Wentworth, Vietnam veteran, Able Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Cavalry Regiment, 1st Cav Division. And so, John, when and where were you born?
Born in June 15th, 1943, in La Jolla, California, next to San Diego.
And being a West Coast guy, what was your childhood and teenage years like growing up on the West Coast?
Well, I bought my first car for $100 with my paper route money. Smoked like a chimney. Smog had just been discovered then, so that there were not a lot of air quality restrictions. Um, my folks got divorced when I was 9, so I lived with my mother for the rest of the time until I graduated from high school. And she was a student for much of that time and got her PhD and taught philosophy at Occidental College. So I grew up in a pretty intellectual, heady environment. But the rest of it was just pretty much like what the movies showed. 1950s growing up in Southern California was like pretty girls wearing revealing sundresses. It was not bad at all.
No kidding. Now, did you have any hobbies, surfing, cars, anything like that growing up on the West Coast in California?
I worked on my car much too. I basically failed in my attempt to be a car mechanic. I put a lot of effort into it. I just didn't get very good results. But no, I did not.
Well, through that, the late 50s and early 60s through your teenage years, that's a pretty pivotal time in American history. You've got Kennedy becoming president. You've got advisors being sent to Vietnam now by the United States. So when did you first hear about Vietnam?
I really don't remember. Probably I started paying attention a little bit when I was in college. I was pretty absorbed just with the process of growing up.
Now, with that too, you graduate, I assume, in 1961, 62, around that time frame, right?
60.
So you graduate in 60 and then off to college. So where did college take you?
I went to Antioch College for my first year in Yellow Springs, Ohio. It was known as a hippie school. My mother was sort of a hippie academic, so that worked. But I was not ready for college and had an economics, plus I had an economics course that was taught by a guy with a heavy accent, and I couldn't understand a word he said. Plus, I never understood economics until the Cray computers were created, and economics started to be based on data. I'm sort of a data freak. I'm a little odd that way, and I'm a little Aspergery. So if it's driven by opinion, I don't understand it. If it's driven by data, I'm right there. But I just was not mature enough. So I discovered radio. There's a radio station, WYSO, in Yellow Springs, Ohio, that the school ran. And I hooked up with them and spent much more time fooling around with the radio station than I did do my studies. So I left at 1 o'clock in the morning on a Trailways bus to go to the more forgetting of my two parents. My mother was now in Baltimore and worked as a disc jockey for a year in Baltimore. And then went back to school at Boston University and got a degree in broadcasting.
Wow. Well, go
And
ahead,
then
sir.
the draft got me.
Well, being a disc jockey, what kind of music were you into? What were your favorites?
Well, I had an all-night show, and the guy who was on before me it was a little radio station with a very low wattage transmitter that had to be cut from 1,000 to 250 at night. So at night, it barely got out of Center City. The signal barely got out of Center City. And Baltimore was predominantly black in the center city and white in the suburbs. So from sundown to sunup, the programming was focused on the black community. My friend and predecessor in the daily schedule was a guy named Billy Fox Williams, Foxx. And Billy Fox played hard R&B until 10 or 11, and then played jazz from 11 or 12 till 1, and then I came on at 1 and played jazz for a couple of hours. And then at like 5 in the morning, when people started going to work, white people started going to work, started playing rock and roll and country. And then I got off at like 7 o'clock, and the morning my guy got on. So I was exposed intimately to a lot of different kinds of music, and I liked West Coast jazz myself.
That's incredible, the music experience that you had. I know a lot of people associate, of course, Vietnam in the era with the music. And being a disc jockey, I mean, you're exposed to Motown, to different types of jazz, to various types of rock, what would be considered hard rock at the time. I mean, country, bluegrass as well. I mean, it had to be incredible.
It was a good year, filled with lots of sort of side experiences that were lots of fun.
Well, if we can expand on this year, so what was that year like working as a disc jockey? I mean, you seem to have enjoyed it, recall it with a good memory. So what happened?
Well, I was very young and very naive and didn't know anything about radio stations, so I just got a resume together highlighting my experience at WISO and started walking around town, knocking on doors at radio stations saying, "Hey, do you need somebody?" And I noticed that a couple of radio stations, and that's from California, where I had gone to junior high school with a population that was a quarter white, a quarter Mexican, a quarter Asian, and a quarter black. So I was pretty much colorblind. I was not conscious of people's the different cultures. I just thought folks was folks. So I didn't understand when I left a couple of radio stations that people were snickering behind me. And it dawned on me months later that it was a black station and that I was making a fool of myself because no white guy would go and apply for a job at a black radio station. But I ended up at this WWWIN, and they needed a continuity manager, someone who typed up the log of what the announcers had to say and what ads they had to run, and somebody to work the all-night show. And so, and who announced it was an ABC station, and they got the ABC feed that, and they also got feeds from religious organizations. Back to the Bible and the World Tomorrow were shows that were played every morning between 10 and 11. So I had to be at the station at 10 and then announce the station breaks, introduce religious shows, do the station breaks between the ABC show. I don't remember what it was, it's too old. And then play music for the first couple hours of the afternoon and then go sit at my desk and type up the log. And then I got the all-night show after that. And when I had the all-night show, I would get phone calls from night owls, one of whom was a young woman named Andy George, who was a local gypsy girl. And there was a Romany conclave up the street from the station. And I had an opportunity to get to know her and learn about gypsy life, which is not a usual experience for a 19-year-old white guy. So I just had a lot of experience like that. Fabian came to town and we put him in the front window of the downstairs part of the building that we were in, called a bunch of cops because we thought there was going to be a huge crowd to see the rock and roll star Fabian. Only we didn't understand that his time had passed and there were more cops than there were fans. Just a bunch of stuff like that.
Well, I mean, and through this experience, you end up getting this broadcasting degree. And in those years in college, were you able to see some famous bands of the time period that just came through?
No, I wasn't really very interested in that. I was more interested in just not flunking out of college again. I came within a hair's breadth, but I was running there were two radio stations at Boston University. There was an outbound one, WBUR, that is still very prominent, and then the NPR station. And then there was the inward facing station, WTBU. And I was the manager of that, and they desperately needed somebody to manage it. And so they decided to give me one more chance at one point after I gotten too many D's. Because I was sleeping through class and stuff like that. I was not a good student.
I can sympathize with that. My first couple years when I was in college, I was not a good student either. I was distracted by girls and extracurricular activities.
Yes, sir. I can relate.
Well,
Yeah, and once I hit my major, I did really well. I was on the dean's list 2 out of 4 semesters, but I finally got something that I thought made sense and I could understand and I enjoyed.
that was the same for me when I was taking my history classes. I really cared. I put in the effort. I actually proved a point. I too made the dean's list. One, I proved that I could do it to my parents, but also my advisors because they were hounding me. And it was the fact I cared about history, but if it wasn't history, I didn't care. I'm shooting for the minimum.
There you go. Where'd you go to college?
Little college here in well, big now. Appalachian State University in the western part of our state. We're known for beating Michigan in 2007 in football. It's a big thing we hold over Michigan fans.
Rock and roll. It's really good.
Well, now when you were in college, and so this is a period of what, 1963 to 6 or 7?
I went to Antioch in 61, 62, was it disc jockey 62, 63, was it BU from 63 or 64 to February of 66.
Now, in that time frame, did you see any perhaps Vietnam protesters coming to the college or any recruiters coming to try to get anyone to enlist into the war yet?
Boston was not at that time a particularly progressive city. And so, no, I did not. My world was me and my 3 roommates in a 5th story walk up across the Mass Pike from BU and the TV station and the radio station. And that's really all that I saw.
Now, being in Boston, just for a history guy, there's a lot of historical significance in that city.
Yes, all of which I ignored.
Now, leading up to this, you graduate, and were you drafted or did you volunteer and enlist into the army?
I was drafted and then I decided to get a 1Y because I had a ganglion, a cyst in my wrist. So I got a 1Y, 1 year deferment and worked in a film processing lab, processing 16mm black and white film. And then got recruited to shoot second camera on a Westinghouse TV documentary.
Wow.
And then got recruited to work at a film production lab, on a film production company, as second camera and second editor. And had you're probably not old enough to remember that. Do you remember Spiro Agnew?
No, sir.
He was Richard Nixon's vice president at one point and ended up getting arrested for for fraud. And spent some time in jail and ended up as a beer distributor in Florida. But at the time he was the Baltimore County executive and running for mayor of Maryland, which he succeeded at, and we did all the TV commercials. I did myself, all of them but two for Agnew. But when you tell people who remember him, who were paying attention in that time period, it's a little embarrassing to say that the guy got hauled off in chains.
Well, with that experience of working in cameras and film processing, I'm a little shocked that you didn't end up as a combat photographer or a correspondent, just try to working with film for the Army in Vietnam.
Well, it's a testimony to how bad my decisions were. What I did was I volunteered ultimately to become a Signal Corps officer and went through basic training and then went through advanced infantry training and then went to Fort Benning into the infantry OCS program. And about a quarter of the way through, I totally lost faith that I was going to ever see the Signal Corps. And I didn't think that I was mature enough to lead men to their death. And so I quit infantry OCS about halfway through. So I got deployed to a casual company and made a film about some SEALs going through jump school at Benning and did some other stuff like that, figuring that eventually I was going to get swept out of this casual company and I'd go to Germany. And then it didn't look like Germany was going to happen. And I thought, well, I'll go to Korea. That's still all right. I was married at the time, and my wife can go to Korea and have a good experience in Korea. And then the first ever all college graduate OCS class hit week 7, which was quit week, and half of them put letters on the CO's desk to quit, and the CO was pissed off. And the brigade commander decided that from that point forward, anybody who quit, including those of us who were hanging around in Casper Commission, going straight to Vietnam. And so that occurred, and a week or so later, I had orders to Vietnam.
Well, with that too, if I can, if you don't mind, take it back slightly. Your introduction to boot camp, what was that like for you?
Oh, it was traumatic. I was a mama's boy and a wimp. And my feet and the leather boots didn't fit each other, and so I had blood in my boots at the end of every day from blisters. I didn't really hit my stride physically until OCS, when I wasn't going to get chow until I could do 10 chin-ups on the way into the mess hall. And then something snapped and I got coordinated and started being able to do the physical stuff.
Wow. Now,
But
was
I was able to do it in basic and AIT. It was painful and I didn't enjoy it at all.
Now, in basic training for you, outside of the physical demand, were your instructors, were they pretty harsh, violent as well?
My grandfather was a West Point trained general. My mother was his daughter. I had grown up having to make a quarter bounce off my bed when I made it, because that was the test. Do you know about that?
Yes, sir. My
Yeah.
father told me about it.
Yeah. So the mental discipline was not an issue for me. And the idea of being a subordinate and reconciling myself to being in the subordinate role. I only had one incident where I mouthed off at somebody and did push-ups and sit-ups for about 2 hours to pay for it, and I learned the lesson.
Well, what was the incident, if I may inquire, sir?
Oh, they wanted me to buy a bond. They wanted everybody to buy bonds. US savings bonds. And I didn't want to. And I said, no. And they said, get out, get up, get out, get up. For the better part of 2 hours, at the end of which I said, oh, those bonds look really good now. So wise financial investment, where do I sign up?
Now, for your instructors at this time, were any of them combat veterans returning from Vietnam?
I think they were, although I don't remember. I don't remember Vietnam being part of the landscape in the military until I went to a pre-Vietnam training for a couple of weeks. And then it all started to come into focus for me.
Yes, sir. Well, and just leading up to that too, in basic training, when you finally are introduced to a rifle, what rifle were you issued in basic training?
M16.
And with that, you're taught to, of course, zero it in, sight it in on the range, you're going through the part of clicking through it. So what's that like holding an M16 for the first time?
Well, in the first place, I knew how to shoot and was a good shot. My mother had taught me to shoot when I was 12. And the only thing I had a difficulty with the M16 was remembering to keep my cheek pressed up against the stock. Because if you don't, the stock jumps and you spit blood for the next couple hours. So after I did that a couple of times, I learned, and I would get my cheek pressed up against the stock, so when it went off, it didn't mash up my gums into my teeth. But I was very glad to get to Vietnam, when I got to Vietnam, to get an M16 because it was a pile lighter.
Well, speaking of that, when you're shooting the M16 in basic training, and I could
Never did it. Oh, no, it was the M14 in basic.
M14 in basic. Now,
It's 7.62 rounds wooden stock,
heavier weapon too, if I'm not mistaken.
much heavier than the 16.
Now, with that, what was your opinion of the M14 and of the M16?
I think they're both really fine weapons. I like the 16 better. The big debate in Vietnam between the 16 and the 14 is that the AK-47 and the SKSs were 7.62 and could shoot through stuff that the M16 smaller round couldn't shoot. But the M16 round tumbled after 50 yards and did awesome damage, particularly to a soft target like somebody's head. So they just had sort of different emphasis. But I had a real love affair with my M16,
Yes, sir.
and I could shoot it well.
Now, when you graduated and get through basic, what was graduation day like for you?
I barely remember it. Just from the graduate's point of view, it was a bunch of standing at attention and remembering to not to lock your heels so you don't faint and fall down.
I'm sure that doesn't bode well on graduation day.
Well, you just got to make sure you don't lock your heels back. But everybody else was having a good time, and the rest of us were just standing at attention in the heat.
So with graduating, and did you get your MOS assigned to you on graduation day, or did you know it beforehand?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't remember. I don't remember. I went to advanced infantry training, so it must have been beforehand.
Well, and what was your MOS?
11 Bravo.
11 Bravo. And from basic to AIT, did you go straight to advanced infantry training, or did you get some leave time?
I don't remember. It's too long ago.
Well,
I got time between AIT and OCS, but I don't remember if there was a gap between basic and AIT.
well, and in AIT, what are you being taught as an 11 Bravo in the United States Army?
AIT is a complete blank to me. I have no recollection of AIT at all. I'm sure we were taught small unit tactics. But what I learned in basic and what I learned in AIT is all blurred together in my mind.
Yes, sir. Well, and through that, from AIT to, of course, eventually this casual company, when did you get your orders that you were deploying to Vietnam?
And I was sitting around in the casual company waiting for something to do. And I'd finished a film about the SEALs going through jump school, which was a ton of fun to make.
Oh, I'm sure it was.
Get to go fly in the airplane, put an emergency parachute on, and hang out by the door, filming the guys jumping out the door.
Now, is that film still able to be found on the internet?
Negative.
Ah, man. Now, with that film, how long did it take to make that film of the SEALs going through jump school?
I think shooting was probably as long as their class, but I don't remember how long that was. A couple, 3, 4 weeks. And I don't remember how long it took me to edit it.
And so this film ends up getting completed, and then you get your orders, and then I assume you went to the West Coast.
I went back up to New York because my now ex-wife, my then wife, was at Fort Benning. So got her squared away, and then left from state of Washington.
Now, in Washington, is that where you found that, or is that where you were introduced to that pre-built village to represent a Vietnamese village?
No, that happened at Fort Dix.
Now, this village, was it built by instructors and was it pretty accurate?
I don't remember it all. I don't remember a village. I just remember a lot of conversation about how hot it was and you had to take care of yourself. Small unit tactics at that point of the war were pretty crude. I got another dose of it when I got to Vietnam. The CAV put everybody through a week's worth of training. And I don't remember what the contents of that was either, but I don't remember any villages because we were rarely in villages. We were in the woods the whole time.
Well, and of course, getting to Vietnam too, and being out in the jungle in the woods as well, it's incredibly interesting that a lot of the woodland is similar to the tree lines and the forest that we have here, the density of it. And through that, your flight from Washington, how long did that take for you to get to Vietnam?
I don't know as long as the airplane flew.
And then where did the plane land at?
Pontoon, I think.
And when you step out, what's your first impression?
It's part of one of my issues about that experience is that I have forgotten big hunks of it. I have suppressed big hunks of it. And excuse me, my dog is being fierce.
It's okay, sir, no worries.
Um, I just was consumed by getting to where I was supposed to get to, which was on K. Because that's where the CAV was headquartered. And that's where I learned that I was assigned to A company, 2nd of the 5th.
Now, within A Company, 2nd of the 5th, as a cherry, an FNG, were you assigned as a rifleman to one of the platoons on arrival?
Yeah, they had just come out of a big fight in the A shot. And we're in semi-stand down on Route 1, guarding bridges. And so I got assigned to the 2nd platoon. We were sleeping on grave mounds to get up out of the rice paddies. This guy named Freddie Vestudo is the radio operator, and they decided to call me Winnie. So he goes, hey, Winnie, what you do in the world? He goes, oh, I was a disc jockey, man. And I didn't broadcast the fact I was a college graduate. He says, oh, you like to talk on the radio? This is like day 2 in the company, right? You like to talk on the radio? Yeah, man. You want to talk on my radio? I guess, I don't know. He comes back, I talk to the sergeant, you're the new radio operator. And then after that, somebody tells me that radio operators have an average life expectancy of 15 minutes. Oh, good. This sounds like this will be fun.
Yeah, no kidding. That's one hell of an introduction to Vietnam.
Yep. And I heard yesterday, I was talking to one of the guys that I was there with. We talk once a week. And he was telling me about what he heard is that Freddie Vestudo went back to Cicero, Illinois, and was playing cards in some establishment. And he was a hustler, so his playing cards later on in life makes total sense. And a quarrel erupted in the room next door to the room that Freddie was in, and some guns were drawn and fired, and Freddie got shot through the wall, and that was the end of Freddie Vestudo.
Jesus. It's a sad way to go.
Teach son of a bitch to pawn the radio off on me.
Well, with that, was Freddie the radio operator in country for how long before you got there? Month, couple of months?
Probably a couple of months. People rotated through that job, except for me. I stayed a radio operator almost the whole time that I was there.
Now you were, of course, I assuming carrying the platoon's Prick 25.
Pick 25. Took 25 extra battery, 5 smokes. And then I became the demolition guy. So then I had a couple of 5-pound sticks of C4. I carried, somebody else carried the blasting caps. So I carried 65 pounds.
That's pretty heavy weight to be carrying out there, humping through the forest, all across to the A-Shaw, the jungles and whatnot.
Particularly for a kid who grew up as a wimp
No
with a
kidding.
philosophy professor for a mother.
Now, speaking of the radio and the smoke grenades as well, you've got your helmet. What else are you carrying?
I sweat more than most people, so I carried an extra load of water. Two soft canteens on my hips, 2 hard canteens on my front. I did not have to carry belts of machine gun rounds. So I carried a couple of books. I had something to read during the downtime. Food, 20 clips from AM-16 and a bandolier across my chest. And I don't remember what else. I collected a bunch of little stuff, but I know I had an AM radio of this big, which for that time was pretty radical.
Well, with that little radio, what could it pick up?
Oh, sometimes it could pick up Armed Forces radio. Sometimes not. And the coverage was not uniform throughout the country.
Now, could you ever pick up AFN on your Prick 25?
Not that I remember. No.
Okay.
Did not know. He told me how to do that if if it's possible.
Well, and I know it was pretty common for grunts on the ground in Vietnam. Did you have any graffiti or anything written on your helmet when you were in country?
No. No, I put maps in the elastic band. try and keep them dry because I sweat so much.
Now, how many maps would you carry when you were in the field?
Well, it depended on what job I had. I started as the platoon sergeant's radio operator, and then I became the platoon leader's radio operator. Then I became the CO's radio operator. He had two, one outbound to the battalion and one inbound to the platoons. And I had the one. I think I was the battalion guy. So I carried a lot of maps when I was the CO's. I mean, if we were traveling, I would have maps for our leaving place and our arriving place. But if we were just hanging around one part of the world, and that part our travels would keep us on one map, I would only have one map. They were about this big when they were unfolded and then laminated in plastic.
Yeah, 1 by 50,000, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I don't know. I have some of the maps in my garage, but I don't remember.
Now, with that, as a radio operator, the maps are necessary just so you know the location as well of the platoon or the company.
I guess I don't remember why I had maps, except that I know I did.
Now, as a RTO, do you remember any of the call signs or the comms that were used over the radio?
Yeah, that's pretty much burned in.
What was that?
Hmm?
What was your initial call sign when you were working in with the platoon sergeant?
Lean Apache 6 Mike India. Lean Apache's the company. Six, no, six. Yeah, 6 is leadership. 2 is platoon. Mike is platoon sergeant. And then I was that India, which is a radio operator.
That's pretty incredible. And then as the radio operator with the platoon, all of the platoons are on the company net, correct?
The platoons are all talking into the company net, and then CO's got one talking to the company net, one talking to the battalion net.
And so in the field, you're probably hearing pretty common chatter between the platoon sergeants, the platoon RTOs, and the platoon sirs.
Yeah, I don't remember. I only remember a couple of instances of doing that, but yes.
Now, over the radio in itself, you would never say anyone's full name over the radio. You always refer to them with their call sign, correct?
Right.
And do you remember the reason for that?
Yeah, just general security.
General security?
Yeah, you don't want somebody to figure out somebody's first and last name and then send them a nasty gram back in the world.
Well, I know and that did indeed happen too in some instances.
I'm sure it did.
Well, and through all of this, as the RTO, you're also taking photographs when you're not in the middle of combat.
Well, actually, a couple of those photographs were in the middle of the Charlie Alpha combat assault leading to the biggest fight at the time I was there. But for some reason, I had an extra minute and put my pack down, standing behind the CO. And I don't know if you remember the photograph of the guys jumping out of the helicopter in the bamboo forest.
Yes, sir. If you don't mind it, I can pull that up for us here in a minute when I scroll to it.
Sure.
Let me see. But I mean, looking at these photographs, they're incredible. The quality of the shots, I mean, it's considering the 1968. This is excellent. I mean, this is something that you'd see in a newspaper or Life magazine shots.
I had been trained in college. I had a teacher, his name was Dondas, and she taught me how to see. It was one of the greatest gifts anybody ever gave me because I take photographs to this day.
Wow. So how did she teach you that?
So tracing paper and put it over a page showing a great work of art and traced the edges of every major element of that piece of art. And then you take the paper away and you're just seeing the composition. All you're seeing is the placement of each eyeball focus. And you start learning what makes a good composition.
And through that, we get the impact of that through a photograph like this.
Yeah, I didn't have an opportunity to frame anything very much. I should have been, well, I should have had, if I had a zoom, I could have zoomed back and gotten the three guys in the front a little bit to the left. But what I was trying to do is I was trying to balance the three guys running with the three guys all hunkered down.
Well, it's a great shot of Huey Slick coming in and, troopers embarking and clearing out of the LZ that's obviously already secured.
Yes, in the beginning to about 7 really horrible days.
Well, and before we get to that, one of the photographs that I noticed in this, and then I'll ask some more questions, is that the intro photograph here. These three kids here that a lot of people, at least in my experience, often forget that there were civilians in Vietnam that, people that you interact with occasionally and that everyone else did too.
We spent some time doing harassment and interdiction. You mentioned the topography of Vietnam. There's beaches and then berms and then rice paddies and then rolling hills and then the mountains that the Ho Chi Minh Trail went through. And this is when we were in the rice paddies and we were doing harassment and interdiction to keep people from goods or people from having easy movement because we were up right next to the DMZ. And so we would go from town to town, sometimes encircling it and sweeping it, looking for people that were hiding there. Sometimes just walk around trying to be intimidating and scare people. So we would, and these little villas were villas that had maybe, if anything, 20 houses, maybe 10 houses in it. So they weren't towns. They just were little villas. But the locals had figured out that they could make money off of us. And so in that box behind the guy on our left, we'd have burlap bag. You can sort of see one sticking up. Yep. And in it would be straw or sawdust. And in the sawdust would be ice and beers and Cokes. And we got a warm beer and one beer, one Coke every night. Every night I was in the woods but one. The logistics that we had in the first cab was really superior. But if it was the middle of the day and we were thirsty and didn't want to drink water, and the locals would come out, and there would typically be one hooker, depending on where we were, and a bunch of kids and some other mama sons who were selling wares, mostly Cokes and beers.
Well,
So
and through that,
those are the people whose photographs are in that book.
well, and two, I mean, you know, having a kid offer you a beer or a Coke, that would be maybe kind of hard to turn that down just because, maybe they're a kid. So I get the economic drive there.
Well, you just had to have some money on you.
And I think in one of those photographs that I looked at, there's one that shows a trooper turning someone away because they wouldn't buy the good or whatever was being sold at the time.
Yeah, some guys were irritated by the locals. Some guys were charmed by them. everybody had his individual reaction.
Now, with your arrival in country and getting there, of course, becoming the RTO, what was your first patrol or operation like for you?
We would pull shifts, being alert to guard stuff on around the bridge. But that was sort of nothing because nobody was going to mess with us during the day. There wasn't any danger. And then at night, we would go out in the late afternoon and walk up Route 1 and look for a good ambush spot. Make note of where it was, walk back, eat dinner. As it got dusk, we would go back out to that ambush spot. And then by the time it was dark, we would just drop off the road to the side and set up the ambush. Stay there all night, waiting for somebody to come sneaking down Route 1. Nobody ever did, because everybody knew we were there. We weren't 100 guys, but not, there's nothing subtle about the arrangement. And where we were, the bridge that we were right across the road from us was a bunch of Seabees. So there's a big American presence, and so there wasn't a lot of smuggling or sneaking down the road, but we would set up ambushes pretty much every night. And then we moved up to the mountains from there.
And through that, seeing that change in the terrain as well, you experience a lot of the heat, but also the coolness at night. So, from your experience, what was the terrain like and moving through the terrain?
Well, down in the rice paddies, everything was flat. So it was hot. And it was not hot, it was not cold during the nights. And the primary thing we had to look out for were booby traps.
Were they pretty common?
I think one of our guys got hurt. He lost his eyesight. But I think only once did we get hit by a booby trap. It's a Chicom grenade with a wire attached to the pin, and the point guy wasn't looking down.
That's a pretty nasty combination there when just not being able to see that too, because I know the Viet Cong were experts at camouflaging those booby traps often.
Yeah, well, we did the same thing. I mean, war's not a nice game.
No, it's not.
So then we left there and we went up into the mountains and ensconced ourselves at LZ Mooney. And the mountains, of course, are long spines going north-south with ribs going off east and west. And this was actually a rib that went north from a long ridge. And they shaved all the foliage off of the top, put barbed wire around it, put a bunch of 105 howitzers on it, dug a bunch of bunkers. And we would spend 3 weeks out walking around the mountains and then come back and full guard duty on the LZ Mooney for a week. And then we would go back out. There it is.
Now, for this LZ, how many birds could get into the LZ at once?
Depends on the size of the LZ. I think Mooney only a couple maybe. We helped secure another one. And I remember it fairly vividly because I was running the LZ and having a hard time getting the pilots to do what I was telling them to do because some of them thought because they had a general, they could just go land wherever the hell they felt like landing. And I probably was an E3 at the time and had no say so at all. But we could put 2 or 3 helicopters on the ground on that one, but Mooney was pretty small.
Now, with Mooney kind of being on top of this hill, was it pretty common for mortars to come in at that nighttime?
No, nobody messed with us. We had, I think the Cav has kind of a reputation in the first place. And as time went on, we got a reputation of being sort of badass. So that helps. But the other part is that we had a thing called the Mad Minute. At 1 o'clock, somebody get on the radio and go, "Niner, niner, niner, get ready for the Mad Minute." And everybody would wake up, load tracers into their weapons, point outwards, and then on command, everybody on the LZ would shoot. And it would shoot down the slope. So if anybody was tiptoeing up the slope to try and throw a grenade at us or anything like that, they would have to take very serious second thoughts.
I
And if
definitely would.
somebody had mortared us, we just would have followed a Huey or artillery and blown them up.
Well, through that, I've read about the Mad Minutes, and I know that that definitely would deter anyone in the area just by hearing that sporadic hail of gunfire.
It would get their attention.
No, certainly. And I think this photograph does excellent justice in describing the terrain that you mentioned of the knoll, the ridge line here, the fingers that lead down to other hilltops there. I mean, we're talking very mountainous terrain, up and down consistently, very changing.
A lot of up and down. You got very strong legs.
Well, I was going to ask, did working in this terrain lead to a lot of casualties with twisted ankles or any kind of broken legs?
Nope. We were good at what we did.
Well, and Cav is well known for their actions in Vietnam, and I would agree with you in the statement that the reputation preceded that, and as well as the nomenclature of being known as badasses, most certainly. And so, for you operating in this area, where was your first firefight? Do you remember that?
Before we left the rice paddies, we saw a little bit of activity, but mostly it was Viet Cong, not NVA, and it was guys just irritating us. And matter of fact, I remember vividly sitting on this grave mound with my feet in the foxhole, drinking a cup of coffee with my rifle across my lap, and some guy started shooting at us, and nobody moved. Because we can tell from the sound of the bullets that he's not aiming straight. And so there's no danger. And we're in the middle of a rice paddy with bamboo hedgerows around the perimeter. And the guy's hiding in the hedgerow shooting at us. And if he started getting close, then the machine gunner on that side would shoot at him with the machine gun, which would pretty much call a halt to that activity. So we had developed without having been, with my not having been in a lot of firefights up to that point, we developed this kind of bravado that you can't hurt me. So then there's no reason for you to even try. And if you're going to try, we're not going to take you very seriously unless you get close, and then we're going to kill you. The other guys I was with had been through the A-Shaw and had a reason to be cocky. I just picked it up from them.
Well, and it's necessary in that world, in that mindset, to have that cockiness. I mean,
Yeah, so that,
bravado, it's needed.
yeah, you can't do that work and be afraid all the time. And at that point, I developed a lifelong habit of fear turning into rage. I've carried a little packet of rage with me the whole rest of my life.
And with that rage that, that you pick up, I mean, I think it brings a excellent point of the adjustments from a combat zone into civilian life. I mean, that was incredibly traumatic. I mean, I've read through the Advanced Warfighter, your little biography testimony you wrote for them, and I know that after Vietnam, that caused a lot of problems for you.
I was nuttier than a fruitcake. Yeah, the worst part is that my then wife came up behind me. I should preface this by saying that absolutely nobody except for her was sympathetic or nurturing about my experience. Most people just didn't want to talk about it. And people like my family that I thought would have asked questions about it just didn't. And if I brought it up, they would turn away from me. And my ex was not like that. She worked very hard at being as nurturing as possible. So in that spirit, she walked up behind me and throws her arms around me to give me a hug, and I cocked and went back at her neck. It stopped about an inch from breaking her neck. That definitely got my attention. So I was smoking a lot of dope. I was housebound for a while. I couldn't be housebound for too long because I got a job as a teaching assistant at UCLA. I had gotten out of the Army a month and a half early out for school. I had to get on my bicycle and ride to UCLA every day and teach these snot-nosed children how to do television production. I don't want to be second camera today. I want to be sound today. And that kind of attitude in the woods means somebody's going to die. I just wanted to go, but I didn't. But I was not really sad when that period left.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's a important aspect of the Vietnam story that we as people need to understand what happened after the war. I mean, you bring up a great point. The war didn't leave you. The effects of it were still there.
Well, it's still there to this day, and I'm 80. And it comes and goes. My experience with warfighters has helped tremendously. And should anybody listen to this video, I would encourage them if they're having, no matter what war, Vietnam or any of the more recent wars, if they're having problems of any kind at all, Warfighters is 100% free and works. We
Yes,
change
sir.
people's lives.
Well, and through that, I mean, we've got you here today, John, to tell your story, but at the same time, you're even wearing a shirt of Warfighter Advance to show the meaning it has to you.
I didn't understand the question.
Well, I was just commenting on the fact that you're even wearing a shirt by Warfighter Advance right now.
I should have asked your permission, but I decided to heck with it.
Don't have to ask my permission. Wear whatever you want to.
Well, it's an extraordinary program and I'm still engaged with it. I'm on the board still.
That's awesome. And I think that through this interview and through this story, that our first interview, I fully believe that there will be more. But it's important to understand the success of yourself after Vietnam, but through Warfighter Advance as well.
The test, you say?
Success that you've had through Warfighter.
Yeah, it's been a real privilege to be able to help, and I've made some contributions to the organization that I'm really proud of. And I'm in contact with the guy now who's a new member of the Warfighter family, and he and I sort of become his mentor. We talk every couple of weeks. He's the Navy Command Master Chief
Wow.
in E9, and he's got a drinking issue, which he's working hard to stay clean. And he has just offered to be my son's mentor. My son's a gunner's mate one in the Navy.
Wow.
And will be coming up in a couple of years for his boards to become a chief. And he just, as of today, picked up a mentor to school them about how to handle that.
That's awesome.
And that's very much in the spirit of warfighters, is that we're family. And that's part of what we do, is we give a lot of people who come to us who were in whatever their military family was, and then got out and broke contact with everybody. And they feel isolated. And so whatever PTS issues they got get magnified because of the isolation. Low self-esteem grows in isolation, for instance. So we give them a new family. And then we realize that we can't just give them a new family for a 7-day training period. We've got to keep it going. And so we do keep it going. I get a phone call every month from somebody making sure I'm okay. From a warfighter's person. And then I pick up mentees along the way periodically.
Wow. That's an incredible program that's been created and clearly has had an overwhelming positive impact on your life.
And 400 or 500 other people as well that run through the program.
That's incredible.
And we have data to support that assertion.
Well, I, for one, am going to do some research after this interview on Warfighter Advance in more detail because that's incredible.
Well, let me warn you that the website is in the process of being rebuilt. So when you look at the website, have a forgiving point of view.
Yes, sir.
It's just old. But then go back and look at it in another month or two and it'll be brand new.
Yes, sir. I gladly will. I mean, and now through this, have any of your former Alpha 2-5 veterans joined or had any work with Warfighter Advance?
Oh yeah, the guy I talked to the other day was there. He came with a guy named Raul Hernandez. Raul Hernandez was the guy I was most afraid of in Vietnam. I was more afraid of him than I was of the bad guys. He was big, he was fierce, he was just a terrific soldier, and just scared me to death. But he turned out to be a major recruiter for warfighters.
Wow.
He's probably about 10, 15 people through, and he comes when they come and mentors them through the process, and then keeps in touch with them afterwards.
That's incredible.
And another one of my favorite guys who's a guy who left a small congruent town, and the small congruent tight-knit family to go to war, came back, went back to the family farm, started up a truck repair operation, did that for his whole working life. We'd see him at reunions and he'd seem completely congruent. And then I noticed that his Facebook photograph was a very dark and foreboding side profile of him. And he also started putting some angry posts out. So we started working on him. And we got him to go. And he's been better since.
That's awesome. I mean, I don't think that you could ask for a better turn of events and to see the impact of Warfighter.
Yeah, Warfighter is very good.
Well, through that and through this first interview today, I think that's a great way to tie this one out is the positivity of Warfighter Advance. And if anyone who watches this first interview with John and I needs aid, Warfighter Advance would be there. And John, if anyone did reach out, could I put them into contact with you?
Put him in contact with me.
Thank you, John.
Appreciate it, Zach.
Well, and the way that I always end off all my interviews, because John, what I'm hoping is that we'll get a series of interviews where we go through your story from your, of course, the big fight that you end up getting involved in, but through other experiences in Vietnam to after the war. And so with that, thank you for your service, John, and truthfully, welcome home.
Well, thank you so much. And thanks for doing what you're doing. It's very important.
Thank you, sir. That means a lot to me. I'm just a guy with a passion, but thank you.
All right. You take care of yourself.